Trapdoors at dusk, confessions by dawn. My name is Miles and I design lies you can stand on. Illusion consultant is the title on the invoice. Backstage rat is closer to the truth. I build trapdoors that close before applause, mirrors that argue persuasively with light, and choreography for hands that need to look innocent. I'm in love with the physics of persuasion. I'm less gifted at the ethics. I live with Rowan. He's a structural engineer who believes in math the way some people believe in saints. He comes home late with the city in his beard and the day in his shoulders, and lets both of them go near the sink. He has a laugh that retracts when he's tired and a habit of kissing the back of my neck while I forget to put tools away. On our refrigerator, there's a torn index card that says "Speak by noon." We taped it there after a season of sentences delivered at the wrong temperature. We are not strict, but we don't throw rules away lightly. The Tuesday when the mechanics were fine and I wasn't, I was at the Lyric Theater talking a pulley into politeness. We were 3 weeks into rehearsals for Cade Laurent, a magician whose career runs on dusted mirrors and better jawlines than mine. The Lyric is all velvet and apology. Cade is all velvet and something else. He looked like the sort of man who learned empathy from reflections and decided to be excellent at it. We were building a vanish that required the floor to make a decision in less than half a second. My hands smelled like graphite. I had a coil of black rope around my wrist and a pencil behind my ear, and I was exactly the person I liked being when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. The joint email Rowan and I use for deliveries lit up my lock screen with a polite betrayal. Thank you for your stay, Orpheum Suites. Time, 12/10/3/02. Points, 200 added. The theater clock was stuck at 10 to 2, the way theater clocks are. So noon arrived in my chest instead. I didn't call. Our household rule for anything not yet a disaster is 2 loops around the block before nomming it. My block was the corridor under the stage where the pipes gossip, and the floor remembers every step you've ever pretended not to take. I walked it twice. The dimmers sighed the sentence all dimmers know. You already know. Cade was waiting by the edge of the stage when I came back. He had taken the top button off his shirt from boredom or deliberate audience calculus. He held out a water bottle and watched me take it. "You look argumentative," he said, as if it were a cologne I'd applied too generously. "The Hinge wants a therapist," I said. "So do I." He smiled because he has a religion built around that gesture. "I can't help the Hinge," he said. "I do know something about confession." "I've heard you prefer witnesses," I said. He laughed, tilted his head, then moved closer the way people move when they've learned to treat space like a curtain. Rowan texted at 11 that night with a photograph of a beam and a note about load paths. He sleeps where girders are arguing and still remembers, "I want to know what he solved." I sent back a picture of a trapdoor disguised as a gentleman and the caption, "Behave." He sent back a blue heart, which is a good faith effort when your hands are usually oil and Steetler pencil marks. Cade said later we were inevitable. It felt more like choreography. The first time he kissed me was in the wings after a stumble-through that went better than the rest of my life. It was the kind of kiss you supply your own backstage music for. His hand found my ribs, and I forgot the difference between misdirection and invitation. He pressed his mouth to my throat and said my name in the tone he uses to cue spotlights. I let him because I wanted to feel like an effect I couldn't troubleshoot from the booth. Afterward, we stood a foot apart so the air could decide whether it was complicit. He touched the edge of the trapdoor with his shoe and said, "We could leave everything exactly where we found it and climb down anyway." He could make damn near anything sound like a card trick. I told him I had a man at home and a conscience at work. He put his hand over his heart with a theatrical innocence that felt both accurate and dangerous. "So do I," he said. Only one of ours is good at quick changes. I went home at 2, smelling like dust and not him. Rowan was asleep on the sofa with his hand under the cushion like he was bracing a foundation. I watched him breathe. On the counter, the index card with our noon rule had slid a little under a grocery flyer, and I left it there, telling myself gravity is benign and not a warning. The next afternoon, Cade found me under the stage with a wrench and a ridiculous amount of self-control. He crouched beside me like prayer. "I need you at the Orpheum tonight," he said, and he made it sound like a technical rehearsal instead of what it was. "We're doing a donor event in the ballroom. There's talk about adding a reveal to the end of my speech. It would help if I could vanish somewhere you have designed." "I didn't design hotel rooms," I said. He said, "Then improvise," and rested his hand for half a second on my knee as if checking whether my reflexes worked. I didn't text Rowan because there's nothing dignified about trying to be clever with a rule you yourself proposed. I told myself I was going to the Orpheum to protect my work from a client with bad instincts. I told myself I would stand in a corner with a radio and a sensible distance. I told myself a lot of things that had their coats on before I could stop them. The Orpheum Ballroom has a chandelier that could file suit for custody of everyone's attention. Donors made slow circles on the carpet like secrets deciding which shoes to wear home. Cade worked the room the way illusionists work anything, by knowing where eyes get hungry. He spotted me, smiled as if I were applause, and told his handler to give the speech a minute more of confidence. He spoke about wonder with the charm of a man who sells it by the ounce. After, he excused himself with a gesture his publicist would have framed, and I followed him down a hallway because I've built careers on not asking the right questions. He kissed me in a stairwell where the wall was still warm from some other afternoon. He slid a key card into my palm like a rabbit into a top hat. "Room 915, he said, and it didn't feel like an address so much as a test. He went ahead. I waited long enough to be ashamed, which isn't very long. I let myself in and found him sitting on the edge of the bed with that face men wear when they've already decided how to spend your principles. If you want the part that will live longer than we will, it's the way he put his mouth against my wrist before anything else, as if he were listening to see whether I would lie. He undid my shirt like it was a plot. I returned the favor with an expertise that would have looked good in depositions. He pressed me down, whispered, "I want you present for this." And the worst part is I was. The room smelled like citrus and the kind of housekeeping that thinks wiping is the same as absolution. He was generous and selfish in the exact amounts that ruin people. I was honest in the way bodies are when they forget whose story they're in. After he said, "I like you better on stages you didn't build," and I said, "I hate that you know that," and he kissed the inside of my elbow with the kind of intention that has boundaries on paper but not in rooms. He asked about Rowan like he was curious about a deck of cards. I said, "He's a better man than these walls," and Cade said, "He may be, but you belong here right now," which is a line I won't forgive for how well it worked. When I got home at 3, Rowan was awake at the table with the cards for a footbridge spread out like a tarot. He looked up with the sort of softness that knocks furniture over. "You missed a good fight about aesthetics," he said. "We settled for safety. You would have applauded me and then mocked me. I can accept that absence." We didn't talk about the Orpheum because I still had a kiss on my wrist that didn't belong to him and because it was not noon. We went to bed and the dark tried to do its job and failed. In the morning he made coffee and put his mouth on my temple while the kettle argued about boil. He said, "I have to check a site near the river. The decking wants drama." I said, "I'll be at the theater teaching a trapdoor to repent." At 11 I stared at the index card and thought about writing something preemptively virtuous. At 11:30 a text appeared from a number I didn't recognize. The pictures are persuasive. Attached were 3 photos taken in a stairwell I already knew intimately. Side angle, back of his neck, my hand at his belt. The anonymous caption said, "Consider the value of discretion for a man whose brand is credibility." I felt my stomach do that trapdoor feeling I have spent my career controlling for other people. I left rehearsal pretending it was about notes and walked the 2 blocks to Rowan's site, because there are disasters you get rewarded for nomming early. He stood on the scaffolding arguing politely with a crew about the romantic properties of friction. He looked at me and saw the wrong kind of wind. We walked down to the river and I said, I was unfaithful, like a man who writes press statements for a living and needs to hear his mouth betray him. He said his name, because he makes bridges and needs to know what he's connecting. I told him. He didn't throw anything. He didn't make a sound I haven't deserved. He sat on a stack of lumber and put his head in his hands like the polite version of collapse. I showed him the photos because I don't know how to love people with anything held back. He nodded as if gravity had checked in on our problem. He said, noon. And I loved him for still wanting the rule to be the container and hated myself for needing one. Back at the Lyric, Cade pretended nothing mattered and texted me dangerous kiss, with a heart that I deleted with the same thumb I used to pick locks on stage. I told him about the photos because men like him collect information the way stagehands collect bruises. He sent back a single word, Rossi, the producer. Of course the man who owned the show would prefer to own the people in it. He had video, Cade said, of everyone who thought broom closets erased their math. He liked leverage. He liked insurance. He'd trade me for a less moral magician, and I'd been already traded to the version of myself I said I'd never audition for. I found Rossi by the fly rail and asked him if the CCTV needed a lesson in narrative arc. He smiled the way accountants smile when you mention art. You make things disappear for a living, he said. Your skills are transferable. He proposed a figure. I told him I'm a consultant, not an accomplice. He said that was an untested hypothesis. I thought about breaking his nose and then remembered I don't hit men whose lawyers are better than my alibis. At noon I went home. Rowan had coffee that tasted like somebody believed in us. He sat across from me at the little table by the window and watched the city change its mind outside. I told him everything the way you say lines when you know the understudy is getting the role tomorrow. I told him about the hallway and the hotel and the stairs and the smell of citrus, and how easy it is to move a life when you know exactly where the springs are. He asked if I wanted to stop. I said I wanted to start again. He asked if I loved Cade. I said I loved the version of me who doesn't have to answer that. We were quiet long enough for the building to remember its age. He put his hand over mine, palm to palm, like men do when they approve of funerals. He said, if we keep this, the price is daylight. If you write anything you can't read to me at noon, you don't get to put your name on it. He added, and he doesn't get to keep you when he needs the stage. He did not say the word mercy. He didn't have to. We decided, because adults sometimes do. I texted Cade that we were done. He wrote back 3 sentences that sounded like fire without smoke. He added a heart I refused to interpret. I emailed Rossi a note that said his cameras needed new sightlines and mine needed better contracts. He replied with a smiley face and a suggestion we both understood. I forwarded the photos to an account that doesn't belong to anyone anymore and let the cloud become a weather report I had already lived. That night Rowan came to the theater because he wanted to see the thing that had borrowed me. He stood in the back while Cade did his best impression of a miracle. He saw the way people breathe when the trapdoor sells them comfort. He clapped when everyone else did because he is kind even when he's tired. We walked home along the river and didn't talk much because we didn't need to. At the apartment, He pressed me against the wall with the sort of care that lives inside precision. He kissed me like we were nomming a street again. I put my mouth against his throat and felt the math return. We went to bed without turning off the lamp because the light had earned its keep. If you require the intrigue summarized for export, a magician, a stairwell, a producer with cameras, a boyfriend with a rule, a version of myself that forgot why trapdoors exist. If you need the erotics labeled, they were real and enough, and not the point. The point was choosing whether to be a man who sells wonder and buys harm, or a man who learns to set a stage for apology and keeps promises when the audience has gone home. The lyric still smells like dust and velvet and the past. The Orpheum still stacks emptiness like it owns it. Cade still texts in the tone of a coin deciding which side to show. Rossi will always have a reason to check a hallway, but at our window the index card still says speak by noon, and the coffee still tastes like his name looks in my mouth, and the city outside keeps trying to line its switches without complaint. For a few hours at a time, it does. For now, that's the only kind of illusion I'm interested in keeping.